Hey guys, Metal Jesus here, and I'm back again with another one of these videos where I talk about games that I personally play on some of my older systems. These videos are meant to be a kind of a personal look into really, again, what I play on a specific system. These are not buying guides. This is not necessarily hidden gems. I'm going to talk about games that are fairly common, but yes, there are going to be some hidden gems in there because I can't really help myself. We're going to take a look at the Super Nintendo. Now, the first game that I want to talk about is called The Legend of the Mystical Ninja by Konami. And when I have my Super Nintendo hooked up, this is one of the cartridges that will inevitably get plugged in, and I'll have a blast playing it. Now, if you're not familiar with this game, well, I'm not surprised because I don't think it was as popular as other games that came out on the Super Nintendo, but that's a real shame because it feels very unique to me. Basically, the game is broken up into two types of styles. You will have town exploration, where it functions kind of like a beat 'em up, where you'll kill enemies for money, you'll also get new weapons, and while in town, you go into different huts and different stores, and that's where you can learn attacks, you can buy food for health, and you can even play mini games. So check this out. So these mini games are some of my favorite parts about this. You'll go into different huts and give them some money and play these games. And you can see here, like, you've got a first-person dungeon crawler where you're trying to get through a maze, get some treasure. There's also an arcade shooter level. There's a level where you're playing whack-a-mole. There's just a bunch of these. And again, it feels very unique and cool for the time. And then the second type of gameplay is where the game transitions over to a kind of traditional 2D platformer, although to me it reminds me a little bit of Ghosts and Goblins, where you travel from one side of the level all the way over to the other, and then you'll take on a boss. And this game is hilarious. It looks great, it plays great. Every time I play it, I always get a little bit further, and there's just so much to discover. It's definitely one of my go-to games on the Super Nintendo. The next game is a game that I think is probably on a lot of people's lists, and that, of course, is Donkey Kong Country. Now, I've said it before, I remember distinctly going into a Toys R Us when this first launched, and there was a kiosk set up where the game was playing, and I saw it for the first time, and I was blown away. I was stunned at how great this game looked. And the great thing is that as amazing as it looks, it's just even more fun to play, even today. Obviously, the game is known for its pre-rendered graphics, which I think still hold up even today. When I see them, I still get that feeling that I did when I first saw them. But Rare knocked it out of the park with everything around those graphics too. The gameplay is excellent. The level design is perfect. I love all the hidden little stuff that you can find throughout it, trying to spell Kong with the letters. And then also too, I really like how they were clever with giving you sort of two hits by basically having, Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong working together. So if you take a hit, well, you can keep on going with the other one. It was very clever for the time. And the game was great mixing up the different levels. Obviously, you start in the jungle, but then very quickly you're underwater. There's rain effects, and then, of course, later on you have one of my favorite levels, which is the mine ride. So it's a level where you're basically just trying to hold on for dear life, and so many other great levels in this game. It's it's just fantastic. And obviously, there's many ways to play this game today, especially a game as popular as Donkey Kong Country. But there's something to be said plugging that real cartridge into a real Super Nintendo, holding a real Super Nintendo controller. It just feels right, and it feels like, again, it just feels like going back to 1994. Here's a game you don't hear that much about. It's called Zig Zag Cat, and it's for the Super Famicom, and originally I heard about this in a video I did with John Riggs when we covered import games, but ever since then, it's always kind of stuck with me as a really fun arcade game. And you guys are seeing the footage here, and as you can see, it's very similar to, Arkanoid or Breakout. Now, I'll admit, there is a bit of story that happens in the beginning of this game, and it's all in Japanese, so I have no idea what's going on. But the good news is, if you want to play this game, it doesn't matter, because once you get past the first minute of this game and the story, well, you're right into the action here. And again, it's a very, well, I'm going to call it a simple arcade game because sometimes that's what I'm looking for. But I do really love these kind of brick breaking style games. And this has just enough new ideas to keep it interesting. For instance, I like how it scrolls almost like an adventure game and you're just walking through the level, which is pretty cool. But notice too, the paddle that you have, unlike some of those other games, you can actually thrust it up a little bit, which changes the strategy in this quite a bit, because you can actually reach things while the ball is bouncing around, or you can actually use it to damage other things too. So again, it's just a little bit of strategy added to this. And again, probably not the deepest game and maybe not for everybody, but you know, I dig it. All right, guys, you know me and you know that I love racing games, so of course I had to include some of my favorites in this video. Now, what's cool about this era, and specifically the 16-bit era, is that there was a lot of these pseudo 3D racing games that looked isometric, and this is definitely going to be some of my favorites right here. The first one I want to mention is called RPM Racing, which is short for Radical Psycho Machine Racing. Now, what's cool about this game is that it was developed by, well, basically Blizzard, but at the time they were going by Silicon and Synapse. And this was an early Super Nintendo game, and because of that, it's not perfect, but I do want to mention it because at the time it was a little bit groundbreaking because it uses the high-res mode on the Super Nintendo to basically look a little bit more sharper than most other games. However, the game runs a little on the slow side, so it's not really my favorite. My favorite would probably be its sequel, which is called Rock and Roll Racing. And as you can see here, Rock and Roll Racing is much faster and frankly just more fun to play. Also, it's got a really cool soundtrack that I wish I could play, but it's a bunch of licensed songs, so I'm not gonna risk it. But it's just, this game is just the whole package. It's really cool. And then to round out the racing games I usually play is Biker Mice from Mars. And as you can see here, it looks fantastic and it plays really well. You can definitely see the evolution of racing games on the Super Nintendo here. And like I said, Biker Mice from Mars is a fantastic game if you like these 3D isometric racing games. All right, so the next game I want to talk about is, of course, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Yet another game that I think a lot of people associate with their childhood and also just great memories on the Super Nintendo. Now, my first experience playing a Zelda game was actually the original on the NES, but in my mind, I think actually Nintendo just nailed it here with A Link to the Past, because the move to 16-bit is having a little bit more color in the world, more things to explore. Honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with this game. As a matter of fact, when it comes to Zelda games, I actually do prefer this style, this old school 16-bit style to the newer ones. I mean, again, I understand that people like Breath of the Wild and all that, and those are great. But to me, this is what Zelda is all about. And so I'm not going to go on and on about this game because I know most people know what it is and what it's all about, but it is just such a nostalgic trip for me to plug in the cartridge, like I've said before, and hold that original Super Nintendo controller. It just feels right. And this is a game that should really be in pretty much anybody's Super Nintendo collection. All right, next up I want to talk about shooters. I love shooters, and well, you know, you could argue that the Sega Genesis got more of them and definitely some of the classics of the era, but there are some really great games that appeared on the Super Nintendo. And the first one I want to talk about is UN Squadron. I like this game a lot because it's a horizontal shooting style game. It has great graphics. It's got a really cool anime style and cutscenes. Plus you can pay for upgrades. It's definitely a challenge, like a lot of these are back in the day, but it's one that I keep coming back to. The other shooter I will always play is Parodius, another game that John Riggs turned me on to, and as you can see, it is a Super Famicom game. And these style of games are technically called cute-em-ups because, as you can see, they have cute graphics, but don't let that Don't let that trick you, because these games are still really hard. But I like playing these games because it's silly, it's fun, it's lighthearted, and you're just never sure what's going to be the next thing that you're going to try to take on. It's definitely crazy. And then the other shooter I will always play is called Spriggan Powered, and this was a gift from my buddy Drunken Master Paul when he went to Europe. He brought this back, and man, such a great game, so much fun. So while a lot of fans don't necessarily think of the Super Nintendo as a great shooter console, because again, so many great ones came out on the Genesis, but these right here prove that yes, there are some great games you can play on it. Next up is an RPG that I discovered much later in my life, and that is Shadowrun. And what's cool about this is that it is a cyberpunk RPG, but it's set in the future, specifically in the year 2050, but it's set in Seattle, so it's set in my hometown. And if you're not familiar with Shadowrun, it's actually based on a popular pen and paper tabletop game that, well, certainly some of my roommates used to play back in college. And as you can see here by the gameplay footage, it's a pseudo 3D isometric view, but what's cool about it is that unlike, say, Final Fantasy and the other games you would normally play on the Super Nintendo, this game does not have turn-based combat. Instead, it's all playing in real time. That definitely lends some stress to playing this game. Actually, early on, you'll walk out the building and people are trying to pick you off from windows, and you're just like, what the heck? What's going on? So yeah, Seattle is definitely a dangerous place in the year 2050. You definitely have to keep on your toes. Some other things that are kind of unique about this is that, for instance, in this game, you control things with an on-screen cursor, which when it first happens, it definitely feels very old school PC to me. And even the character dialogue feels very old school PC, especially for the time where, you know, in most Final Fantasy games, you wouldn't have a ton of choice, but in this, it's almost like an adventure game where you'll have a conversation with a character, and then through the different dialogue, you'll get little highlighted words that you can then pick from, and then you kind of guide the conversation based on those words. That really reminds me of old school adventure games that you would get from, like, say, you know, LucasArts or Sierra. So yeah, I'm a big fan of cyberpunk games. I love RPGs, and I like how this one just feels kind of old school PC. It's definitely got its own vibe, and I really dig that, so I always keep coming back to it. Here's a really obvious one, but if I'm being honest, I absolutely love Super Mario All-Stars. And this is another cartridge that I ended up getting a little bit later in my collecting history, because I already owned the original Super Mario Brothers, you know, for the NES, and then also I have my all-time favorite, which of course is Super Mario Brothers 3 on the NES. But here you have a compilation of 4 classic games, but they're remade for 16-bit Super Nintendo. And I think it took me a while to kind of appreciate that because the original games are so beloved. But these games run and look excellent on the Super Nintendo. So now if I want to play the original Super Mario Brothers, I'm more apt to reach for this cartridge because I do like the graphics a little bit better. And they kept the level design almost exactly the same. They really knew what they're doing with this remake. The only thing I would say that is kind of odd is that in the second level, when you're underground or in the cave, there's this echoey thing that they're adding to this version because they can. And that is a little off-putting to me, only because I like how the original sounds, but that's very minor. That's very nitpicking. Now, if you are a person who hasn't for some reason played Super Mario Bros. 3, I beg you to try this game because it's such a brilliant game. Every time I play it, I'm always discovering stuff, and that's the brilliance of it, is that they put so much hidden things in the third game. It's amazing. And again, I go back and play the game every chance I get. So, all right, guys, well, that is a quick look at some of the Super Nintendo games that I still play today. And of course, I didn't mention a ton of games. You are watching this video and shouting at the screen because I didn't mention Super Metroid or F-Zero or something like that. So everyone's list will be a little bit different, and I can't wait to read your comments down below. Tell me what games you still play on your Super Nintendo. I'm dying to know. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.